Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hillemeyer, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. And hello again, Jeff Hillemeyer.
What's up, Alex Gonzalez?
I see we have the full Dragon Army, billboard systems going on over there.
Hold up your mug. Let's see it.
Hey, that's right. Here we go. Today's segment is brought to you by Dragon Army. So call Dragon Army for any needs you have, even if it's not related to marketing or digital. How about
Anything.
that, Jeff?
It works.
Hey, Jeff, one of the things that I'm very fortunate to get to be working on is the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Atlanta. It's thriving. Now, it's interesting when I think about this. Back in my corporate days, when I was actually in Equifax, you were the person who kind of helped unlock the understanding of the startup ecosystem here in Atlanta. And as I think about it, because I always say, "Oh, Jeff's the guy who knows how startups work." And now here you are coaching, corporate people. So it's a full circle here. But so what from your view, how have you seen this startup ecosystem kind of evolve here in Atlanta?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think we have the most potential of any city to change the landscape of startups and entrepreneurship. The diversity of the startups that are being created today is tremendous. Now, whether they're getting the funding they need, whether they're getting the access they need, that is still stuff we have to work on. But the nucleus of talent here and incredible leaders that are starting companies, I think that's amazing. The other thing that I think is great about Atlanta is we're starting to, this has always been a problem with Atlanta, but we're starting to be comfortable with who we are. You're hearing a little bit less of, well, we need to be the Silicon Valley of, or
Right.
the New York of. It's like, let's just be Atlanta. And that's what I get excited about the guest we're going to talk to today, because I think he is looking at all of this differently and uniquely from the perspective of sort of his world, but also Atlanta. And so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Jeff. And putting kind of a Metro Atlanta Chamber hat on, it's from an innovation perspective. What you're saying is so spot on, and I think that element you brought in at the end in terms of we're getting comfortable being Atlanta, and having this unique innovation ecosystem that's both colliding tech and also creative, taking advantage of our incredible university system, which is very wide ranging from our HBCUs to Georgia Tech to Georgia State. But I think you bring up something that's important too, embracing the also diversity and charting a path to really redefine what that means. And Jeff, very well, the diversity in entrepreneurism is a challenge nationally. And so what a better place in Atlanta to change that. Definitely not there yet, but I think with a lot of the leaders that we have, there's a great opportunity here, which is why I'm excited today about our guest. I got to meet Joey Womack through some of this work around innovation entrepreneurism, and he does so much, Jeff, and so much that it's even sometimes hard to keep up with him because he's constantly pushing something new. He's a natural entrepreneur himself. So I am just excited here to have Joey Womack join the show.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so let's bring on Joey. Joey Womack, welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Doing really good. My morale grade is an A right now, so I'm feeling good.
That's pretty good, especially this early in the morning as we film here. But that's excellent. Well, it's good to have you here. And it's interesting, as I always like to say, if you don't know Joey, you don't know Atlanta, because you've been doing so much for Atlanta, and actually for much more than Atlanta as well. And it's interesting, if someone goes into your LinkedIn, what I love about you is that you can't describe Joey in like one line, because you're involved in so much stuff, and we'll get into that with WeWorks and Goodie Nation and Amplify for Good, and there's probably like 5 other things that you're not even telling us that you're working on.
Sure.
But so what's your one-liner? How do you describe Joey Womack?
You know, super connector, passionate about making a change on a global level.
Oh, that's nice. So let's start bringing it down then. So talk a little bit about the projects you're working on. Just kind of describe what it is, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, the main thing now is the Intentionally Good project by Goodie Nation, and so that's really an ecosystem and initiative. And I'm happy to say now we can go into detail shortly about how we're expanding nationally. And that's all about helping diverse founders and social entrepreneurs to get connected to influencers, large companies, and to capital providers. So essentially, it's helping to fill the family and friends and angel funding gap, or kind of complement it. So super excited about what we have going on. We have some big announcements coming up in the next few days, actually.
Excellent.
Nice.
So we look forward to that.
I'm curious, Joey, is the discrepancy worse or better in Atlanta compared to in New York, Silicon Valley? Like, how do you see the landscape nationally?
It's interesting, and we got some interesting data that's come in the last few days. I do think that it is the discrepancy is larger in Atlanta. You have more diverse founders seemingly in the city, so I see there's almost like this. It's not necessarily a glass ceiling per se, but there are limiting factors. I mean, to me, it boils down to network and a few other things. But we're seeing some interesting things, not necessarily from New York, but we're seeing a good number of founders from Chicago and like Dallas that have raised over $1 million. Never would have thought that, quite honestly, because if you talk to those very same founders, they also complain about there's not enough diverse founders in their particular ecosystem. To see that there are in many cases there's 4, there's 5. Then when you compare that to Atlanta, where there's a lot, but we don't have that many that even have raised over $1 million, it's really interesting.
Yeah, enjoying it. And I've had the privilege of being able to get to know you, particularly through this work in particular. So, and one of the things that you're really honing in on is this network, or access to network. And because I think in this discussion, obviously capital is critical, so getting the access to capital is essential. But you really have this perspective of, it's about networks, and that kind of unlocks everything. So talk a little bit about how you kind of came to that, and how you are helping these entrepreneurs get access to networks.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So part of it is genetic for me. So I get it from my mother. She's a human Facebook, so to speak, and she gets it from her uncle, who was from Montgomery, Alabama, did a lot of civil rights work, really close with Martin Luther King Jr., his photographer there. He also owned a small nightclub, so all the civil rights activists, when they would come to Montgomery, he would host them and stuff like that. And so, all my life I had this ability to kind of see people over here, and kind of connect them for whatever reason that either they would like, or I see the opportunity. And so then I started to take that same philosophy and then apply it to entrepreneurs. We're also funded at Goodie Nation by the K4 Center out of Oakland. They've come out with this report called the Leaky Tech Pipeline. And here's where they identify a lot of reasons why diverse founders and people in general don't get the access that they need, or essentially they fall out of the tech ecosystem. And so one of the very specific problems that they identified is around access to well-connected people, specifically access to people that have graduated from top colleges and universities, and those that either currently work for or used to work for top companies. And so that's where I kind of pinpoint my efforts to connect people. And I feel like when we connect our founders to those type of individuals, they can unlock a lot of doors in a very, very short amount of time. We've seen some really early success using that methodology.
Yeah, and so talk about how this works, particularly with the Intentionally Good project, which is part of Goodie. Is it part of Goodie Nation, or that's how you think about it, right?
Yeah.
What are the because I think you talk about there's a lot of potential for founders here, and for you, this is the variable you want to unlock to hopefully change the dynamics. And I think you'd agree, if you cannot change this paradigm in Atlanta, where can you truly change this paradigm for entrepreneurism? So how do you help make those connections for the networks between the entrepreneurs and these well-connected, individuals?
Sure. I mean, sometimes, it's a little bit of, methodology. Sometimes it's just kind of instinct, right? So a lot of times we are looking at commonalities between the type of industry the founder is in, their business model, where they may have gone to school, some of their, the organizations that they sit in. And then we kind of look at on the other side, kind of the same kind of factors. And so at the same time, things just kind of pop up. So for context, an old college friend of mine who I probably haven't talked to in 5, 6, actually probably 10 years, honestly, reached out to me on LinkedIn. She's living in New York, working for Urban X, the accelerator up there that gives $150,000 and gives access to Mini Cooper engineers. And so, who you have for me as it relates to founders? And she, again, I haven't talked to her in 10 years. She follows some of my updates, and I immediately kind of went to the database, literally our database, and also in my mind to kind of figure out who would be a good fit. And then it ended up with Dahl Avant from Awkward Genuity getting connected there, getting the $150,000 investment, and kind of helping to take her company to the next level. So these are things that kind of happen kind of programmatically now, and we're investing in actual infrastructure to quicken the process of making intros, but also kind of happens just kind of instinctually off the top of my head.
And that, Joey, that's a connection from Florida A&M?
Correct. Yeah,
right.
Florida A&M.
And I didn't think I realized this, but you started your first company in college, didn't you?
Yeah. So it was about parties, quite honestly. The typical college thing, right? I mean, I was in a fraternity, and I was on the committee to throw events, and so this is a long time ago. And I came up with the idea to create a solution for a problem we were facing, and that's getting the word out to a core group of students that were outside our normal group. And the reality is I presented the idea to the chapter for them to do it. This was sending out emails and giving discounts to events, a little bit of essentially customer acquisition. And they said it was a horrible idea. College students were not, this is 2001. They're not going to be on email like that. It doesn't make any sense. And so eventually I took that idea and did it myself and grew it to top 3 in the country.
And that, I'm so curious because I started my first company in college a couple of years before you in '98, and have been an entrepreneur ever since as well. And as I see you create things, that entrepreneurial spirit is so a part of, your ethos. Did that come from your parents? Where did that, how or was that not natural? Did you have to sort of figure out how to do that?
That's a very, very interesting question. So I was actually having a conversation about that this weekend. So actually, I went to school to be an accountant. I had no intention at all of being an entrepreneur. So the reason I wanted to become an accountant was because my dad was an accountant, and had an older cousin who actually lives here in Atlanta now, who worked for Big Four. And so all I knew is that I love numbers and I love trends and data, right? Decently, probably above average in math, but not like super genius or anything like that. And I got to school through a series of serendipitous events, or however you want to describe it. I landed upon this idea, but my mother is really good at numbers. She actually, at the same time, she was actually an entrepreneurship coach back in the day. My dad, unbeknownst to me, was actually an investor in a nightclub. But he had an entrepreneurial spirit, but had never become an entrepreneur. And I just talked to him this weekend, and he would have majored in computer science in college, but he got a scholarship. I'm from Alabama, actually, so Mobile. He got a scholarship to a school at HBCU in Virginia, And they did not offer computer science. So he ended up majoring in business administration with a concentration in accounting. So there's a clear line between my parents and what I do. And then also how they've supported entrepreneurs along the way, and it kind of rolls into me.
Nice.
So when you see entrepreneurs, because it's interesting, because you had this path where, you had this corporate path or this accounting path that you're going to kind of chart it out, but it seems like this entrepreneurship was natural within you.
Yeah.
I'm sure now you're at a point where you're getting a lot of, obviously you do have a lot of entrepreneurs that come to you, and you have a lot of them probably asking advice from you. Can you tell the difference between the person with that entrepreneurial bug or X factor and those who, as someone described once, who just doesn't want to have a boss? I mean, are you able to, how do you identify that entrepreneur that's going to have success? Because not everybody's going to be successful as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. There's a few things. One, it's around just, do they have the ability to make stuff happen? I mean, there's probably a few of the phrases we can't repeat here about how people in the space are kind of describe it, but they just kind of make something happen. Can they go from idea to something tangible relatively fast, right? And then I try to track the rate of kind of ideation to implementation in my head. So as the only child growing up, I had nothing to do but to take my ideas and let my imagination run wild and just try to use it to entertain myself, right? So create something tangible. So I look at that, their ability to make something happen. The other thing I look at is their self-awareness relative to the progress that they've made. So dealing with entrepreneurs now, and Village Capital has come out with an awesome rubric to assess the progress of a company. Do they think they've made enough progress that would qualify for them for like a Series C or an IPO when they've barely produced a product? I see that all the time. And I do know that, well, what I've seen is that the how can I say this? The closer the entrepreneur rates themselves to a third party rating them, the more likely is that founder to be successful. And then self-awareness, yeah. And then third part is what I'm gonna kind of somewhat call CEO competency. And I think it expresses itself in several different ways. How do their financials look? And these oftentimes you see this with people that have been a founder more than one time, or it's not their first time doing it. Can they explain their idea in a clear and concise way in a pitch deck? And it doesn't mean that the pitch deck is beautiful. It's just that is it clear? Can they describe it in one sentence? Do they really understand their value proposition and stuff like that? So I triangulate, their ability to kind of take something or build something from nothing, their self-awareness, and how clearly and concisely they express what they do and other kind of forms of competency. And that's how I can tell if someone's going to be successful or not.
I love that. And I have to give a plug for Tope's How I Built This on NPR, Calendly. Yeah. So amazing if you haven't listened to it yet. But, what you just described, Joey, is as you hear his story and as before he got to Calendly, you could see all those traits within him, right? And then, of course, he finally hit on the right idea at the right time and it was able to take off. I'm curious, though, from your perspective, as you look at more diverse communities in the startup and entrepreneurial world, I almost wonder if there's both some people that to your point, maybe think they've done more than they actually have. But I also wonder if the opposite is true a little bit, that there's maybe a lack of confidence because they don't have the network or the things built in that they see others having. Do you see that as well?
No, definitely. I mean, and I think I'm case study number one in that. In some cases, I think some of it is cultural. So in many cases, and I can speak for many Black communities, if you come out there and kind of express yourself and you're very confident, you say you've done this, in many cases, unfortunately, the community could kind of say, "Oh, you're too arrogant. You think you're too good for us," and so on and so forth. And so that forces, unfortunately, many Black founders to, and this isn't not as adult. This can really start in elementary school, quite honestly. And so eventually, it expresses itself in a culture of kind of essentially. It's probably not the best way to say it, but like suppression occurs, and so you very rarely want to say, like, essentially brag on yourself. And I see it all the time when I'm evaluating applications for various pitch competitions. People just will not talk about all the great things they've done. including things like internships and things like that. So it's an unfortunate thing. And we have to really coach our founders to tell their story even better.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, because there's an element of the networks and the capital, but we all know so much of it is there's that self-confidence, the self-aware self-confidence, right? Because I think it's very easy to find the person that's so self-confident that they're not aware of the reality. But that is an interesting, and by the way, I've seen that even within, when I've, even with Latin executives as well too, where there's an element of not bragging about yourself as much as you should. And bragging is maybe the wrong term.
Yeah.
But that's interesting too. So I would imagine part of your network building also gets into the mentoring building, because this is where having not even another executive, but another founder who's successful or whatever, help coach an entrepreneur to kind of level up that skill. Is that part of what you look at as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's tactically, it's like, hey, add an additional logo on your pitch deck, add this on LinkedIn, or here's how to casually kind of name drop without bragging in terms of your pitch and how you're describing things. It even tactically applies itself during video calls. So what I've seen is that when you meet someone in person, there's some type of power dynamic. The person with the less power, so to speak, may feel a little bit intimidated. And when you meet someone in person, that can express itself in a few different ways. The person that has the higher job position or the power may say that, oh, that person isn't worthy is probably a bad way to say it, but I may not give that person the opportunity, right? Or they make a quick judgment, essentially what I'm saying. When you start the relationship on video, because that personal space is not there, the intrusion in it, oftentimes it makes it a lot easier for the relationship to start off on the right foot, because the person is less intimidated. So you do that, you take an initial connection, have a great first call, maybe do a second one, maybe do a third one, and then eventually you can transition to an offline relationship, but the relationship has already been strengthened and there is no kind of intimidation there. And so that accelerates relationships, particularly for diverse founders, even faster.
Fascinating.
Now, I was just going to ask us about the connectivity, whether it's through intentionally good or through maybe what we're doing with the WeWork, the aspect of physical connection space and creating entrepreneurial space. Is that part of your formula, or is that something you work on to create that physical connection? And how are you adapting in this COVID world as we work through it in terms of making sure those connections still occur? Because it's very different, even when you don't know someone, to make that Zoom connection versus that initial handshake or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I do have an update in that situation. WeWork made the decision to close the lab in Atlanta, and we're kind of revamping the whole labs program globally. So,
Gotcha.
they closed the lab a few weeks ago. But what I did see in the very short amount of time that it was open relative to us then going into quarantine is that physical space where you have a bunch of awesome people together in a very confined environment creates a lot of magic, quite honestly. So I'll kind of reset and see where things go when, things go back to normal, so to speak. But what I have seen is that in a COVID environment, it does also allow for connection to be made on a global level now. Where Goodie Nation it has allowed us to expand nationally. It was already in our roadmap, but what we're going to announce in a few days is going to it just fast track that times 300. So the great thing is that now I understand how to scale programs, build processes, invest in infrastructure to make it happen. So I'm really excited about the future and really excited about what we're about to announce.
Well, and that's a good point too, is that I think in this kind of virtual reality we're living in too, it's actually helping, well, maybe helping is the wrong term, but it's letting people innovate a little bit in terms of what those connections are. So now you could have a connection from across the country, and sometimes the access could not even be within your own city. It's access to the network or capital outside of your city. So that's a good point that it seems like you're taking advantage on in terms of using the virtualness of the world we live in to your advantage for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's interesting to me about that sort of new expansion is it moves into what I love that you have sort of as part of your mission, which is to help 1 billion people. Is that right?
Yep.
And by 2039?
Yep, 2039.
Talk to us about those two numbers.
So the funny story about how it actually originated is this. So I had the idea for Goodie Hack in December of 2013. The next day I found out that I got into this entrepreneur or social entrepreneur support program out in San Francisco as a weekend event. And so that was MLK week. It was scheduled to take place MLK weekend of 2014. So we go out there, there's 30 people in the cohort. You have a former Olympic gold medal winner, same swim team as Michael Phelps. You have somebody that wanted to become the first woman prime minister of Nepal. Yeah, and her father was a high-ranking official in the government. There had a lot of people with global aspirations. And at that time, I'm just a guy living here in Atlanta thinking about doing things locally, which is perfectly okay, right? The first day of the program, the founder of it says, hey, how can we impact change for 1 billion people? Now I'm a competitive dude. Like I grew up playing mainly baseball, but also football. And so I'm like, I'm sitting in the room, I'm thinking, okay, well, how could I make this happen? Like, okay, cool. I'm thinking, Atlanta, maybe Southeast in terms of the impact. And so I'm thinking, okay, how can I make this happen? I didn't find out until a few weeks later, he actually meant, how can we collectively help 1 billion people? Well, by that time, I'd already come up with this plan to help 1 billion people in the next 25 years. So just because he challenged us to help 1 billion people, I took it the wrong way. I thought it was individually. That's how I got to the billion. And I thought like 25 years is not like 10 was like way too aggressive. Like 40 is like, I may not be here, but I mean, let's come up with something in the middle. So I landed on 25 years, so 1 billion people by the year 2039. I started exacting this plan in order to make it happen.
And so you're what, a fourth of the way, fifth of the way into that? How are you doing?
I think so. I mean, you start thinking through like one of the big breaks for us was when Google brought us on to help them think through design thinking as it relates to the 2016 presidential election. So they were building products. This was the fall of 2015. They were building some products to affect the election in terms of people. Everybody goes to Google to search, right?
Right.
And so I'm thinking like, so this is roughly a year and a half after, I've come up with this goal. And, now I'm like, oh, wow. Like you think about how many people live in the US and how many people vote. I'm like, oh, I actually this is happening. This is happening, So I count that from a potential standpoint and a few other companies that we're working with. I think tactically now I look at it is if we can do some clusters of helping 10 companies affect 10 million people each in terms of their impacts, I think we'll be on the way to 10 groups of 10 companies affecting 10 million people. We'll be on our way.
And to that, Joey, in the work you do with entrepreneurs, I believe you focus as well on the social, or is that a big part of it in terms of social impact companies? Because we've been seeing, particularly in Atlanta, a lot of that, right? A rise of social impact companies. Talk a little bit about kind of the secrets of success of that model and what you're seeing in general of these kind of socially good companies that sometimes are for profit, by the way, but it's still impacting people. How do you help support those, and what are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, we're looking just to create a better and more sustainable future for us all. I mean, I feel like the diverse part of it kind of falls under wealth creation, inequality gaps, things of that nature. But yeah, from a standpoint of what we're trying to do, or just me personally, I'm also like Goodie Nation, we're looking to help companies in the health space, in clean tech, and other forms of sustainability. And education is obviously huge. And so our thing is, if we can help them scale up, and the interesting part around the capital piece is that when we do these evaluations, it's extremely difficult for social entrepreneurs to raise capital, particularly here in Atlanta, unfortunately.
Right.
I feel like a lot of the impact investment networks are going to be in the San Franciscos and the New Yorks of the world. I know there's some new models coming out, but we really try to help the social entrepreneurs really think like a true technology startup. Like they're all for profit for the most part. They're all going to be for profit, but
Right.
we try to get them to set aside your passion around impact and build a scalable company so that it makes you more attractive to investors regardless of their impact or not, and that capital will help you to scale up your efforts to help more people. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I
Okay.
just yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
You look at what people like Donovan from Aqua Genuity are doing with the kind of the 23andMe for water. I mean, Gooder, I think, is the kind of the really good test case, and that was kind of early. We helped them early on, and so they went on to Techstars and got a lot of other help. And so now we are able to take some of those models or those key learnings and put it into our model in order to help people scale up. And so you're seeing some interesting things come out of Texas. There's another one working on water. They do it in a different way. It's kind of like IoT within like pipes and things from municipal level. You're seeing some interesting thing in fintech coming out of Chicago and New York, and you're seeing even more. I think the big thing I think everyone knows is fintech as it relates to emerging countries, especially in Africa.
And is the coaching or maybe connections or whatever it might be for a social entrepreneur, what's maybe different from is it really the same, sort of capabilities you need to help build them as an entrepreneur, or there's some unique variables? Because I could definitely see in the funding that model, it might, and I'm sure it's going to have to create, how do we reinvent how funding occurs? Because sometimes the success metrics may be a little different. But is there a skill set that's unique to as a social entrepreneur that you need to build?
I think the thing that jumps out to me from your question is getting them to understand really their impact model and their business model.
Yeah.
If you can align, the easiest thing is to just align your impact with your business model. I mean, it's not something separate. Like the more money you make, it's a one-to-one relationship with how many people you help. Many of them try to shoehorn social impact into a company, and it just creates a lot of confusion. And just in general, when you're confused, whether in business or you're on a playing field, you move slow, so you don't live up to your potential. So trying to help them align their business model with impact is the best thing, or the highest difference.
Yeah, and I think going into that, to me, I think storytelling is probably, it's always critical, right? But when you're a social entrepreneur, by nature, you're kind of saying to anyone that might invest or be a part of that, look, just as important as the growth and the profit will be the impact we make. And so how do you, again, going back to getting people to be able to be confident and tell that story so that you can, sort of bring people into the movement, which I think is, again, a little more important than your typical tech startup that's just like, we're going to try to IPO and make everybody money.
Yeah, if I could also add on to that, I want to loop back to a previous question you asked. Yeah, storytelling from a social impact perspective is extremely critical, extremely critical. I also think it helps to feel or helps to get them over the hump as it relates to bringing in capital as well, which is true, I think, for nonprofits in general. I think we know that raising money as a nonprofit is really dependent on in many cases, outside of relationships based on your ability to tell a story. Going back to a previous question and the question you just asked, Alex, on the difference in mentoring, one of the things I look at is the ratio of how much an entrepreneur talks about their product. If an entrepreneur talks about their product like 80% of the conversation, in my experience recently, I'm seeing that typically they are less successful, or they don't make as much progress. If they can barely mention their product and talk about all the other aspects of their company, it seems like those founders, those CEOs perform better. I think it kind of makes sense because they see the business from a holistic perspective.
Yeah.
When you start to apply that to social entrepreneurs, because they're so passionate about the problem and thus the solution, it makes it very, very difficult. And so getting them to take a step back from the problem and the product and see the entire business is an area that we try to focus on. I think it's an area just in general for people to help out with.
Well, Joey, you have so much. What I love about it is you have this grand vision and purpose, and and you're constantly iterating too within your model. And I love this vibe. There's this element of beautiful consistency in what you do. Yet there's always new ideas coming in, and it seems like you're rapidly able to iterate and stop and reinvent, which I think is just an incredible model, inspiring. So I know it's been a pleasure and privilege to get to know you over the last few years. And I'm really looking forward to the impact you're not just going to bring to Atlanta, but to the world. So Joanne, we're also looking forward to the announcement coming out. And probably I'm going to recommend for people to make sure they follow Joey on social media as well too. Probably by the time we air this, it'll probably be, we'll have this grand announcement out there. There's a lot of activities going on. So Joey, thanks for joining us today here on the Jeff and Alex podcast. And we will see you soon.
Awesome.
Great to see you, Joey.
Great to see you as well.
That was Joey Womack here on the Jeff and Alex podcast. And man, he's just an amazing person.
So inspiring. And we didn't even get into probably half the stuff that we wanted to talk to him about. He's doing so many things. It's terrific.
Yeah, what I love about it, because I mentioned during our wrap-up conversations, is that he's I didn't really appreciate his natural entrepreneurism within him. He's constantly reinventing, but still there's purpose and movement going on. And it's going to take leaders like Joey to continue to make not just Atlanta, but really the country kind of reshape what entrepreneurism is about and give access to more people with more ideas and change the way entrepreneurism looks in this country.
Yeah. What inspires me the most about Joey is that he has the ability to create and build businesses that scale and achieve great things. And yet when you read things he writes, when you talk to him, it always goes back to helping others. And I just think that's something that I wish more and more entrepreneurs would embrace, that yes, you can be successful while also trying to do good in the world. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs think it's one or the other. And it's like, when I talk to people who've built successful companies that are, say, 40 or 50 years old, it's always, hey, when I retire, I'm going to do more good. And Joey's doing it in the midst of his, what I'll call his prime, right? Like he could do so many things. So that's what I like the most. And hopefully it inspires other people to believe that you can do both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, and it's great because he is building that muscle, because it is a unique, what appears to be competing interests and skill sets. Yet what I love about it is he's proactively coaching people to help those coexist and teaching them when to be a business person, when to be social, but still be true to your purpose. So,
and he wants to help 1 billion people. How about that?
That is, you know what? Anybody talks about it not having ambitious visions or purpose, I'm going to refer them to Joey, because that is just amazing. That's just amazing. And I, you know what, Jeff, I'm confident he's going to get there too. So
yeah, no doubt.
Well, good. Well, make sure, encourage everyone, make sure you follow Joey on social media, because he does have a lot going on and he does have some very interesting things happening as we speak. So make sure to keep an eye on what he's doing. And also make sure you subscribe here to the Jeff and Alex podcast. We'll have guests like Joey. We'll also have some interesting topics ranging from talking about our favorite tech to very big leadership topics, whatever the case might be. We'll continue the conversation going. Make sure you connect with Jeff and I also on social media and tell us what you want to talk about and react to what we're saying as well too. So make sure you subscribe here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. Jeff Hillemeyer, great seeing you again.
You too, Alex. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next week.